Hey, Oscar fans, Evan Bland here, along with Sam McKewon, coming to you with a fun Friday afternoon bonus video. We had a chance today, along with a couple members of the Lincoln Journal-Star, to talk with Nebraska coach Scott Frost, and it was a wide-ranging interview over about, 65 minutes or so, talking about all kinds of different things from coaching dynamics to what 2020 was like to some other things to expect next year. And it was pretty enlightening. I don't know. I'll just open it right up, Sam. Just let's get to it. What stood out to you? What were some things that perked your interest from our talk with Scott Frost today?
Well, Scott Frost, I think, thinks he can see around the corner with his offense because the confidence he exuded today and the willingness to stick with the offensive staff and the specificity with which he went through those positions indicates that he knows that it's a little bit of a leap to bring all those guys back, but he's going to do it. And I think he feels like his group is close on that side of the ball. And he kind of brought up, he's sharing play calling duties with Matt Lubick, which was sort of known, sort of not. The mechanics of it were maybe not. He laid it out today really well, but that he's going to work a little bit more with Adrian Martinez, which I thought was an interesting comment, and that he's not going to hire a special teams coordinator. And he's probably just going to go with the analyst route, and he feels like that can get it done because he prefers to continue to have 5 offensive coaches on his staff. And he's the 6th, right? So that was the interesting thing. I think that's one of the takeaways. Certainly fans will react to that. To me, the biggest takeaway is probably the commentary about player development and wanting to have somebody in a role that can connect and contact to the players a little bit better. I asked him about culture and about whether he felt connected to the program. And, you were in that setting too. I think that question frustrates him a little. It feels like there's kind of a narrative there that there's a little bit of a disconnection. And, but he answered it. I mean, he said, yeah, we were a little disconnected because some of the things they would normally do, they didn't get to do this year. Some of the speakers they'd normally have, they didn't get to have because they were in a bubble. And then, of course, they came back so early in anticipation for a September 5th start that backfired on them because they didn't start the season until October 24th. And if people feel like they shouldn't have come back early in that anticipation of that start, people can recall Iowa State lost to Louisiana Lafayette in week 1. Kansas State lost to Arkansas State. Oklahoma lost to K-State in week 2 and Iowa State in week 3. Some of these teams that came back later, they did look rusty early. And I think Nebraska's intention was to look sharp early. And then it backfired on them when they moved the season back, 45 days. And I think Nebraska was just rocked by that. And I think they also just were dead tired by the end of the season. And we'll have more on that as the weeks go on about just how tired Nebraska was. And I think that kind of wore on the team. So those are probably the things that jumped out to me. Not much what he said about Luke McCaffrey really stood out on the record. And then the Wandale Robinson comment, I've talked about it on a podcast. I thought they were already moving in that direction. The comments about it may help us in some ways to get where we want to go. I mentioned it on our podcast that, the idea that the Duck R needs to be the be all end all of Nebraska's offense is antiquated. And I think they're moving in a new direction. So those are the things that probably jumped out to me. How about you?
Yeah, I would add, it felt to me like, even though that maybe if you're a fan, you're looking for something a little more.
Fans will be ticked.
Yeah, sure. You're looking for something a little more significant in terms of changes. But I found it notable, just some of the little things that you can see as Scott Frost kind of evolves from guy who calls plays to head coach and taking more of a global view. And you mentioned the Matt Lubick portion of that and how he will split those duties now going forward. But also what he said about working more closely and personally with Adrian Martinez, from instinctual things that he'll see on the field to off the field stuff to drill work. I thought that was notable. And then our discussion on special teams about again, how it starts with the head coach and the details come from that. And part of giving up that play calling allows him to be a little more focused on special teams on the sideline during a game to help things run a little bit more smoothly. It just felt like this was a year when he moved a little bit further from, again, that kind of offensive coordinator role that has really defined his career the last 5 or 6 years into embracing maybe more of that, that global approach from that perspective too. And so, I thought that was interesting. I thought it was interesting how he kind of pushed back on the narrative that the defense has been and will be the clear strength of the team. And maybe that's some of that's just his confidence in his offense and the scheme. But he really felt like the reason the defense performed better than the offense last year was mainly because of experience and execution and that sort of thing. And he feels like it'll maybe level out a little bit more this next season as it goes on. So I thought that was fascinating that, at least what he told us, he doesn't feel like there's this shift in the how you perceive the program internally, like there maybe has been this last month or so externally.
Yeah, I understand the perspective there. Again, as reporters, we're sort of conduits between a rabid fan base and the people that we talk to, and we appreciate Ross talking to us today. Hope he has a chance to talk in a couple of weeks on signing day to more media, because I think more questions from a broader group of people is always good. Although I appreciate, again, the conversation today, and I think we got some good stuff out of it. But I would say that there's just within the construct of that program, I think how do I put this? I want to put this the right way. Scott Frost obviously loved Wan'Dale Robinson and deeply appreciated his presence within the program. But I can't help but think it's a weight off his shoulders a little bit. That's just not in a bad way, but just like, I think that's probably been with him for at least half the season and maybe a little bit more of how do we get this guy the ball? Is he where he needs to be? Is there a satisfaction or a confidence level there? Certainly in the first couple of games, they didn't really get him the ball. And so I think they're just probably turning a page in a way that isn't necessarily bad for them. They've recruited a lot of bigger guys, bigger receivers, Xavier Betts, Samari Toure, Thomas Fidone, Sean Hardy, Latrell Neville, some other cats. So, I think there's just a sense of wanting to maybe move to a slightly different attack. They're not going to show all their cards right yet, Evan, but the offensive coordinator is a guy that has an enormous amount of experience in Frost's system, but also in other systems. And I think you're going to see an incorporation of some of those concepts a little bit more into what Nebraska's doing. And I think you're going to see a blend that gets them maybe a little bit closer in certain small circumstances to a Big Ten program. There's not going to be a fullback, I don't think, but I think you're going to see some things put in place that help. Oh yeah, that's something that a Big Ten West team's going to do. That's just who they are. I think you're going to see some things built in for bigger receivers, for tight ends. I've said this many times. Your tight ends can run up the seam. It's okay. They're big guys. They can absorb the blows. It doesn't always have to be an over route. And so I thought they got closer to that last year, and I think they'll probably try to tweak it a little bit. But again, fans are going to be like, what's happening here? What is he seeing that other people aren't seeing? Why is there so much confidence there? Why does there need to be 5 offensive coaches? And you never know. There might be changes still. I'm not necessarily of the belief that a special teams coordinator solves all those problems, because it didn't solve those problems when Javon DeWitt had the title. And honestly, it didn't solve it when Bruce Reed was there. I mean, Bruce Reed would leave, an hour before practice was over with a laundry knapsack over his back. I mean, it wasn't ideal. So there's things about there's things about that role that I think people can kind of fetishize, but at the same time, it sounds like they just feel like they need to get a different guy, and in getting a different guy, they'll be fine. So
Yeah.
we'll see. It's pretty interesting, isn't it?
It is. I personally would push back on the special teams thing. I mean, Javon DeWitt by his second year was battling cancer, and
yes,
there were a lot of extenuating circumstances. And you look around the Big Ten West, and schools like Iowa have a guy.
They do. They have a very good one.
Yes. So I was a little surprised that they went that way. But back to what you're talking about with the offense too. I thought Scott Frost, as much as he has since I can recall, acknowledged a little bit more today that the Big Ten is its own thing, and the same style that allowed his offenses at UCF and Oregon to get 85, 90 snaps, those might turn into 60 or 65 in the Big Ten, the way that they play keep away. And he was really, cognizant of the fact that if you speed it up and you go 3 and out, you might not get the football back for 8 minutes. So I thought, that's a pivot from when he arrived 3 years ago, and talking about the Big Ten adjusting to him. I think there's been, obviously he's been at Nebraska long enough now and seen enough of the Big Ten to kind of realize, there has to be a middle ground between what he did at UCF and just conforming entirely to the league. And it feels like he's kind of trying to find that middle ground a little bit more than in the last couple of years. Oh,
no question. No question about it. I think there's some genuine whatever within the walls there. And we kind of heard it after the Iowa game and a couple other games, like, oh, we got to start winning these games. We can't adhere to our philosophy and to the expense of winning. So, it's people will judge what we write with what they write. I would say again that the addition of a player development person is a big deal. It's important, and we'll write more about that as time goes on. But I think that's a bigger issue. And people look at the tweaks and they look at the game day stuff and the offense and all that. But I think some of the things that need to be kind of tightened up are some of those things that I think they're trying to tighten up. Culture, knowing each other, cohesion, all that. I asked him about building the roster too fast, and he didn't love the question because I think we probably diverge on. You know what I think of that. I think he felt like they had to do that, or that was important. He did concede. Maybe did we try too hard? He asked that question out loud, didn't exactly answer it, but I think there's things within the program that need to be fixed that are unrelated to, what do you call on 3rd and 4? And I do actually think the player development thing is an acknowledgement in the right direction. So maybe if you would just define that a little bit, because I think when fans hear culture, the default is like, well, are we back in 2018 again when it's the Riley holdovers versus the Frost guys, and what's the culture keeper? Maybe just define how this is different than that discussion from a couple of years ago. Well, I think part of what Nebraska is trying to do is find a guy that they can that can serve, who can be sort of a confidant of the players and kind of be in a role like in a shepherding role, maybe a little bit younger guy who can kind of listen to players, not necessarily be like a sports psychologist, but somebody they can go to, and somebody who can be a liaison between the coaching staff and magnify the voice of the players, and maybe have the pulse on that team a little bit in a non head coaching role, because a head coach has to have that tiniest bit of remove. Even Dabo has to have a little bit of remove at some point where he's got to be able to say to somebody, hey, you're not going to play here. And a coach has to have that level of authority. And I just feel like Frost probably learned over the course of the season, after he talked to people afterward, whoa, my team was really worn out. They were really worn down. He mentioned sitting with Adrian and saying, hey, he hadn't seen his family in 9 months. We had talked again before they played the Rutgers game. We had this long conversation about a bowl game. And, where I stood on it. I thought if they won, they shouldn't play. I thought it would be easier if they won to just call the season. And what they did is they kind of took a vote the next day, and I don't think that vote went the way they wanted it to go. And then they had to say no, and then there's been whispers ever since. And that, I think a lot of that could have been avoided if there had been just an understanding of, hey, that was it, that was the game, and that was the moment. And if Scott had just said, hey, we're not going to do it, I think that would have sat well with the team, because I think they were exhausted. Mm-hmm. And so, I just think there's little areas there where he's probably going to get a little bit more eyes and ears, and some guys that can maybe, again, plug him into community things or be involved in ways that are just positive. And I think that's part of he mentioned that it was highlighted by the fact that they had 5 players leave in the class. And the bottom line is, you can argue they shouldn't have recruited those guys or whatever. But if you're going to put the time, money, and effort into extending a scholarship to a player, and put the time into going recruiting them and the hours that go into that, you want to make sure that you're setting those players up for success. And I think Frost's decision to do that is an acknowledgement that they can get a little bit better there. And he's got a guy in mind, not part of the program now. It's going to be some outside voice that they bring in, and I think that's positive. Mm-hmm. So I think there's good things happening. I think people will focus on the 10 assistant coaches, and that's fine. But Frost likes his guys. That's something that I think fans have to get used to understanding, is that a head coach has to be really comfortable with his guys. And at Alabama, Nick Saban is comfortable bringing in former NFL head coaches to do very specific roles, because Nick Saban has a system of 100 or whatever analysts off the field who handle all the personnel stuff. Nebraska doesn't have that apparatus. I don't know that Nebraska is going to, bringing in Doug Marrone to coach your offensive line, or Bill O'Brien to call plays, is going to solve anything at Nebraska. Nebraska has to do it Nebraska's own way. And I think Frost is trying to do that. Whether it works or not, we're going to find out. But it's going to be a dynamic offseason conversation now that we know everybody's coming back. It's going to be, people are going to be skeptics. And I'm not sure that Scott Frost minds that. I think he might actually welcome it.
Well, and to me, it's going to be a test of the value of continuity, right? So instead of talking about coaching changes or whatever, we're talking about what's the value of keeping the same staff together for another couple of years when the success hasn't necessarily been there on the field. And if this staff were at Tennessee or wherever, there would be changes. Maybe the head coach would be fired after year 3. So it's fascinating to me that the results haven't been there, but the steadfast message has remained. It's getting there. And some of that goes back to just how bad was it when Frost took over and those sorts of things. But as Nebraska fans know, there has not been, continuity has not been a strength of this program for a long time. And so
they have it.
And so what does that turn out to be? So it's very interesting. You can argue the other side and say, well, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing again and expect different results. But he's banking on continuity paying off. And I think it'll be very interesting to see kind of how that plays out.
Yeah, it will. I agree with you. I'm sure we'll hear from a lot of people about it, and we'll get lots of emails and lots of comments. But I think I appreciate Frost saying where he stands. I sincerely appreciate a guy that's able to not do the Bo Pelini, drop out for 4 months and show back up with a brand new staff and on signing day and not even explain what he's doing. I appreciate Scott being honest and upfront. So that's pretty much all I've got.
Yep. Same here. Sounds like we'll probably hear from Scott Frost again on signing day here in early February. But, until then, it's following, transfers, maybe finishing out the recruiting cycle. So,
yeah, and there might be some news in between then. What do you think? Yeah?
It's possible.
Yeah.
What did Scott Frost say when we said, were there any other transfers? He said, well, it's only Friday. So, not that I know of, but it's only Friday. That was his line. So
I'd expect some news next week. You just never know, but I would anticipate something.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Well, we'll be back for the Pick Six podcast next week. But for Sam McKewon, I'm Evan Bland. Thanks, Husker fans, for listening in. It's there's no such thing as an off season. So enjoy this month, and we'll see you soon.